The 2020 phenomenon of the coronavirus seems to be on its way to the pages of the history books. It's not really surprising considering how impactful it has been to the way we live our lives. We study and work from home, very few people go out, meetings and hangouts and get-togethers are all arranged digitally. Everything encapsulates a whole new lifestyle that we haven't really had the chance to explore before this whole thing goes down. Things are surely different in a lot of ways. However, there are also some unlikely consequences that come with it. Carbon emissions have been dropping since the lockdown began, decreasing levels of air pollution in major cities. We have cleaner air and reduced risks of asthma, heart attacks, and lung diseases. Along with these improvements in the environment, a rising environmental sentiment came to prominence. A perspective that ultimately paints human beings as bad for nature, labeling us as the actual virus that is corroding Earth.
Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area and you multiply and multiply until every natural resource is consumed. And the only way you can survive is to spread to another area. There is another organism on this planet that follows the same pattern. Do you know what it is? A virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer of this planet. You are a plague.
I'm sure most of us is familiar with this sentiment of how badly we have been treating our planet. We will now call this notion the preservation versus destruction binary. This binary consists of the notion that the things that seemingly preserve us as a species are actually destroying the environments around us. It seems to be the case that what is considered human preservation is privilege over what's considered the destruction of nature. What should we do then if the thriving of human society is equivalent to the corruption of nature? Should we regress to a less technologically advanced time? Does the healing of nature require us to stop progressing as a species and to let nature take its course, so to speak, and finish us off with the virus? Is what good for nature also good for us? To shed some light to this dilemma, we find ourselves unlikely turning to a classic piece of fiction about angsty teenagers, giant robots, and existentialism. Evangelion is a pretty old anime about a 14-year-old boy who fights aliens called angels to protect humanity from extinction. Although that description really doesn't do it justice, as the anime addresses a wide variety of heavy topics such as human relationships, psychoanalysis, and existentialism, among other things. However, we really won't go into those here. That I might save that for another video. We'll see. So in Evangelion, there's this powerful secret organization called SEAL. They have this ambitious goal regarding the entirety of human existence. SEAL's goal was to trigger an event which would kickstart humanity's evolution into higher consciousness through what's called the Human Instrumentality Project. They ultimately saw humans as flawed beings, this fundamental flaw stemming primarily from our inability to completely understand each other and our failures to unite our motivations and nuances as individuals. These things then bring forth conflicts and disagreements. And SEAL's solution to this was to convert individuals into a huge collective, transforming all of us into one collective mind where the boundaries between individuals are eliminated. This way we can finally understand each other completely. No more conflicts, no more tension. You and I would be one and the same. Now, the process took place in the climax of the movie End of Evangelion, where individual bodies transform into a liquid-like substance called LCL. Now, what does this have to do with our initial problem? Well, if we look closely into the Human Instrumentality Project, we can identify the same binary we initially find ourselves with, that of preservation versus destruction. On one hand, SEAL tries to save humanity from extinction by bringing all of us together and engage on some type of artificial evolution to preserve humanity. On the other hand, This artificial evolution consists of the destruction of individuals, destroying humanity as we know it. Seal wants to save humanity from extinction by bringing it to extinction. To preserve humanity, we must annihilate it, and destroying humanity means we ultimately preserve it. Here we can see the language boundary starts to break down. We start to see the instability of the binary mentioned. Now, this is what post-structuralist philosopher Jacques Derrida called deconstructing a text. This method was used mainly to show how meaning is ultimately context-dependent. To deconstruct is to carefully identify where exactly meaning is located within a certain text. Now, a text can be anything from books, movies, posters, to plays, and even the news. The next step would be to showcase the instability of that meaning by scrutinizing the context under which that meaning operates. For example, we saw how the binary of preservation and destruction bleeds and turns into one another in the seal example. We will now apply the same Derridian deconstruction to our initial problem. It might first seem that preserving nature and destroying it are completely opposite things. Though seemingly separate, human beings are ultimately a part of nature. So what constitutes preserving or destroying nature? Are the thriving of living creatures to be accepted as the thriving of nature itself? This doesn't seem to be the case, as nature itself poses a multitude of threats such as natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, and these things they annihilate organisms despite them also being a part of nature. Nature creates as well as destroys life, without privileging one over the other. Animals kill each other, and a substantial amount of species have gone extinct before modern human civilization was even conceptualized. It's obvious that even without life, nature continues on. The context in which we create our meaning of what is good for nature is ultimately human-centric. We privilege life over non-life. This notion is not present in nature in itself. Think of all the inhabitable planets and the void of outer space. None of those contain any sort of life within them. We ultimately see and conclude from our own human-centric perspectives that what is good for nature is what is good for the living organisms contained within it. So really, by preserving nature, we mean preserving ourselves as living creatures. Human civilization has done this mainly through various advancements in technologies as we adapt to the threatening reality of nature. Now, it is also these technological advancements that create destructive impacts toward nature, such as the case with carbon emissions, air pollution, and deforestation, among other things. We destroy these things that are part of nature in order to preserve ourselves as part of nature. This is the consequences of our inability to completely separate human beings from nature, as it is part of us and we are part of it. Now, this brings us back to Seal and the notion of destruction and preservation. In destroying nature, we preserve humanity. However, humanity is part of nature, and apart from our own limited human context, we are unable to conceptualize what is and isn't good for nature. So in destroying nature, we preserve nature as humanity. This might seem to leave us no better than when we started. However, now we understand the framework in which the meanings we put into what nature is and what it ought to be. We are able to demonstrate how we impose our own human values into the impersonal nature, and we are able to correctly identify where the binary of preservation and destruction starts to break down. By recognizing the limitations in which we make our meaning, we can position ourselves accordingly in relation to our personal values and to create our own interpretation of it. Now, the question becomes, how should we properly contextualize what humanity is in relation to nature? Are we really only destroying nature? Or are we merely defending ourselves against it? Are we preserving humanity by destroying nature? Or are we also preserving nature by preserving humanity?